All right, and we're now recording. Welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. We'll be talking about what is urban agriculture. Want to give a couple updates. The 2018 Mid-Atlantic Women in Agriculture Conference is just weeks away. We have a pre-conference on social media and specialty crops, and February 9th will be the full-day conference. We also have Annie's Project. Classes have been announced. I believe we have one Annie's Project class that will be happening starting tonight in Southern Maryland. Information about all of those events and webinars scheduled through, I believe, July, you can find at the blue link here, extension.umd.edu/women-in-ag, as well as archived webinars that we have recorded. Would like to thank our collaborators, with a number of universities in the Mid-Atlantic, as well as the sponsors of the Women in Agriculture program. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Nia Little.
Thank you, Shannon. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to turn my camera on for a moment so you can see me, and then I'll turn it off again so we save bandwidth in case that drains anything. So hello, this is me. My name is Nia Little. All right, I'm going to turn the camera off. So I'm here to talk with you today about urban agriculture, and I'm going to, in a moment, share my screen with you and show you the slides. I won't be able to see if you pop questions in the chat, but I do encourage you to do so, and Shannon will let me know when questions come up. This is mostly a presentation with a lot of storytelling, so it's very, very appropriate for interaction. So I'm going to share my screen with you now and start the presentation. So today we're going to talk about what urban agriculture is, specifically where I work in Baltimore, Maryland. My name is Nia. I am an agricultural extension agent for urban farmers specifically, particularly in Baltimore, but I also collaborate with my colleagues across the state of Maryland and a little bit in DC as well. This picture on the first slide is a picture of the flower factory, which is a cut flower farm in Baltimore. The gentleman in the ball cap just to the left of the podium is the farmer there, Walker Marsh. So to start off with, I just wanted to give a little bit of background, take a step back on what extension is, because often when I meet with urban farmers, they may not have worked with extension before. So I want to make sure that you know where I'm coming from. So the land extension is a branch of the land-grant university, and every state has at least one land-grant university. Here in Maryland, we have two, University of Maryland College Park and University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And those universities were started by the U.S. government about 100 years ago, and because of that, they now get to pay that gift forward for perpetuity. So it's our role to serve everyone in our state and make sure that everyone in our state benefits from the research and the education that happens on campus, even if they never set foot on the university campus. So what we do specifically is applied research and continuing education in cooperation with local communities on topics that the community identifies as particularly important. We do this in a couple of different areas. You might be familiar with 4-H, which is our youth development program. I work in the agricultural branch of extension. Traditionally, we tend to have an agricultural extension agent that works with local farmers, and so my role is kind of an update of that for urban farmers specifically. We also have programs in family and consumer science. You may have run into people who teach cooking classes or nutrition classes. And we have the Master Gardeners, which is a program for home gardeners in particular. So that's all the background on extension. Thank you for your patience. So now let's get into what you're really here for, which is urban agriculture. And if you want to share in the chat to everyone so Shannon can definitely see it, what you're particularly interested in about urban agriculture, if you're an urban farmer already, if you'd like to become one, if there's a certain thing you're particularly interested in, do let us know and we can make sure we touch on that during the webinar. So When people ask me what urban agriculture is, I started off by both visiting farms and reading the scholarly literature. So this presentation today is going to be kind of a blend of both the very practical, what does it look like when people farm in the city, and also the scholarly, how do people define urban agriculture in different places. So the definitions that I've read of urban agriculture tend to be very broad. Most papers and the United Nations and the USDA define urban agriculture very broadly as all forms of agricultural production, both food and non-food products, both plants and livestock that occur within or around cities. And that is a very broad definition that includes things like what we traditionally think of as agriculture, a farm where you grow food and you sell it to people. It also includes things like landscaping companies, which are a natural resource-based business, or plant nurseries where people grow ornamental plants for sale. It also includes personal types of agriculture like home gardening and community gardens, and perhaps hobby livestock like backyard chickens. So that is how most people define urban agriculture broadly. My role specifically is to work with people who are trying to do something entrepreneurial with urban agriculture, people who are trying to create an income or jobs by growing things for sale. That definition of urban agriculture is very broad, but I've seen a lot of consensus on it. It's about the same in all the papers I've read. What I've struggled more to define is what is urban. I did a little reading with the U.S. Census Bureau, and they have a couple of ways that they characterize land in the United States. They define something called metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, which are shown on this map here. This is a map of Maryland, Northern Virginia, and parts of Delaware and Pennsylvania. And as you can see, the green shapes are what the U.S. Census Bureau considers a metropolitan or micropolitan statistical area. And unfortunately for my situation, this is not terribly helpful in defining urban because all of Maryland is green. And so I think if you talk to someone from Allegheny County, they might not consider themselves particularly urban. So what I've found more helpful in defining urban is the U.S. Census Bureau's urbanized areas and urban clusters, and they have maps of these on their website. So the purple there is what they call an urbanized area, and the green is what they call an urban cluster, which is essentially a town. And this both those definitions are based on population density and land use. So are there a lot of people in a small space, and is a lot of the land use developed? Buildings, parking lots, concrete, malls, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm using to define urban and urban agriculture. Urban agriculture is when you are doing something agricultural in one of these urban areas, in a city that might be in the city itself, might be in a rural area, but you're doing the agriculture in the city, or in one of these urbanized areas like Baltimore, which is a city, and then there's a lot of urban sprawl just outside of it. And these urbanized areas and urban clusters, they do tend to match what we think of as urban areas in Maryland. At the more local level, wherever you're from, some of you might not be from Maryland, there may be local definitions of what is urban. Here in Baltimore, Baltimore City is definitely an urban area. Baltimore County has rural and urban areas, and in Baltimore County they've defined what they call the URDL, the urban-rural demarcation line, which is very convenient. Within this line, they provide city services like water and sewer and trash pickup, and outside of that area they do not, and they try to preserve open space. So for me, I use this definition to figure out whether if someone is trying to farm within that urban line, I consider them an urban farm. So if you're in a different area, you can look at your local government to see how they define land use in your local area. So that's all the scholarly stuff I'm going to share with you today. When people ask me what urban agriculture is, usually they what they really mean is it really farming? What does it look like? Who does it? How do they do it? So I'm going to tell you some stories about the farmers that I've been lucky to get to work with. This is a couple of pictures of the Greener Garden Farm in Baltimore, which is run by Warren and Lavette Blue. And this is an example of the most common type of urban farming here in Baltimore. It does tend to vary from place to place. And for the rest of this presentation, I am going to talk about the entrepreneurial or commercial type of urban farming where you're growing things for sale. The more broad personal gardening is very important, I think, but the Master Gardener program tends to serve that more. I'm more focused on the commercial urban agriculture, and that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this presentation. So in Baltimore, most of the urban farms that I've encountered that sell what they produce are similar to what you might have heard called intensive market gardening, where perhaps someone started growing vegetables for themselves, and then they started selling some of it as well, and gradually started selling more and more. Or it might be similar to what we used to call truck farming, where people would grow a variety of vegetables and then put them on the back of a truck and drive them around the neighborhood selling them to people. And we used to have a lot of folks doing that here in Baltimore. You can see here Warren and Lavette, Mr. and Mrs. Blue, they started gardening in their backyard, and it just grew and grew, and they started selling at farmers markets and selling to their neighbors. As their neighbors sold their houses, they gradually bought up all their backyards. So they now have about 1.5 acres that they're farming. It's not shown here, but they even have, a small tractor like many small vegetable growers have. And they've gotten registered with the Farm Service Agency so that they were able to take advantage of the NRCS's High Tunnel Grant. So they now have 8 high tunnels on their land, which is enabling them to extend the growing season and sell earlier at the farmers markets and later at the farmers markets than they would be able to otherwise. And that's Mrs. Blue in the high tunnel. Another urban farm in Baltimore City. This is a picture of Strength to Love 2. They are entirely high tunnel based. They actually started farming on what used to be a parking lot of a car repair, an auto mechanic. And so they just brought in soil and put it on top of the concrete and built high tunnels on top. And they're growing some beautiful tomatoes, as you can see in the picture on the right. Excuse me. And they're also growing a lot of leafy greens, a lot of lettuce. And they are an example of a type of nonprofit urban farm, which is relatively common in urban farming as opposed to rural farming. Mr. and Mrs. Blue are farming for profit. They are a very traditional farm. They're a family farm. They sell what they produce to supplement their own income. Strength to Love 2 is a nonprofit whose primary mission is to employ and help make people more work-ready who are returning to the community after being incarcerated. So people who are struggling to find work, their job is to employ them and help integrate them back into the community. And so they're doing this through a nonprofit model and using farming as a way to get these gentlemen interested, and some ladies actually, interested and engaged and learning new skills. This is Boone Street Farm, which is another of those diversified vegetable type farms that I talked with you about. They exemplify another thing that is very common for urban farms that I've seen. They are spread over many sites. I believe they actually have about 7 different sites. So they are what we call a vacant lot farm. Baltimore used to be much larger in population. Back in the 50s, we had almost 1 million people living in the city, and many of those folks have left their buildings behind, and some of those buildings had to be torn down because they were in such disrepair. So there are many vacant lots in the city of Baltimore. Detroit has a similar vacant lot situation. So many farms in Baltimore are on these vacant lots where people have adopted the lot and are started growing things there to try to beautify their neighborhood. And Boone Street Farm is one of those, and they've adopted, I think I think I said 7 lots in their neighborhood. They're also a community nonprofit farm which is organized with the mission of providing healthy food at an affordable price for their neighborhood. And there, with the yellow shirt is Rich Colm, who was one of the farm managers there when I took this picture. They also, as I mentioned, are a very diversified vegetable farm. This is Real Food Farm, which is one of the farms that's been around the longest. I think Mr. and Mrs. Blue and Real Food Farm have probably been around the longest of the farms in the city. Real Food Farm is located on the campus of a high school, actually, and they are run actually by a department of the city's government. So Civic Works is what it's called, and that department's role is to provide youths with employment and with job skills. So they have many high tunnels on the campus of this high school. They do a lot of education with youth, and they have, you can see a picture there of their mobile farmers market. They have 2 of those refrigerated vans that they drive around the neighborhoods and sell the vegetables that they produce at a low price. So all of these farms that I've described so far, many of them use high tunnels for season extension, but they are all essentially the type of diversified vegetable farm you might see in a rural area, but just shrunk down and intensified to a very small scale. When you read an article about urban agriculture, say in the New York Times, often it doesn't look like that. It looks more like very innovative technology, hydroponics, aquaponics, rooftop farming, and we do have some farms like that in Baltimore City, but there are many fewer of them than there are of the diversified vegetable type farm, partly because this type of technology is expensive, so there's kind of a barrier of investment to get started, and also because it is so innovative, people are still figuring out how to make it work financially as a business. So I know I get a lot of calls from people who read an article about this kind of high-tech urban farming, and people get really excited and they call me and they say, I'm going to make $1 million farming in a shipping container and I want you to tell me how. And I kind of need to gently talk with people about how there is a lot of potential in these technologies, but not all the kinks have been worked out yet. So I don't encourage anyone to invest your life savings in a high-tech urban farm without doing a lot of planning and a lot of number crunching about how you're going to, what it's going to take to produce produce your produce, how you're going to sell it, and what price you're going to sell it at, so that you can recoup your investment and pay the cost of production. So let's get into these types of high-tech. Actually, Shannon, it sounds like there were some questions. Are there any that were in particular about the kind of vegetable farming that we've talked about, or are they more about the kind of hydroponic, aquaponic stuff?
Yes, there was a question about how to plan on the vacant lots. You mentioned the vacant lot.
Yes.
So what process to go through to do that?
Yes. So it depends on your location. I can really only speak to Baltimore's rules. I know Prince George's County has some great policies as well. So in Baltimore, the city has identified a list of vacant lots that are on essentially city-owned land. They're owned by the Department of Housing, and they might be owned by the Department of Housing because, say, the homeowner left and never came back and didn't pay their taxes and didn't repair their building, so the city took it over and knocked the building down, and now they're responsible for this land. So people in Baltimore can apply to what's called the Adopt-A-Lot program, and if you're in Baltimore and you're interested in that, I encourage you to Google Adopt-A-Lot or the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, and they have a lot more information about that. So you can adopt these lots, apply to adopt these lots, and take care of them. And it's a very low-cost to adopt them. I think it's about $100 a year that you pay in rent, and it's your job to take care of them. There's another process that they're developing. That system was originally designed for people who just kind of wanted to mow the lot and to make sure it didn't look bad and pick up trash and maybe plant a little community garden. So these more commercial farms have sort of sprouted up in these vacant lots. And this was, in some ways, a surprise to the city, but there are many people, particularly in the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, who think this is a very good thing and that it should continue long term. So they are working on a longer term lease system for commercial urban farms. So you can talk with them more about that at the Baltimore Office of Sustainability.
So there was one other question about the one farm in particular, but opportunities to visit some of these farms and see the technologies, if that exists.
Absolutely. So I think if you're in Baltimore and you're interested in visiting farms, if you want to see the technology, this farm that you're seeing right now, the aquaponic facility, I'll talk with them a little bit more. They are a demonstration facility, and they have open hours for tours. If you have a large group, they want you to schedule ahead of time. They're located at Silburn Arboretum, and if you Google Center for a Livable Future Food Systems Lab, it'll take you to their website where you can request a tour for a larger group, like a school group, and they have open hours on Wednesdays and Sundays from at a certain period of time, and their website talks about that. If you wanted to see one of the more in-ground farms, I think Real Food Farm is probably the most tour-prepared one. They do a lot of tours for school groups, and they also accept a lot of volunteers. So if you're in Baltimore and you're interested in visiting an urban farm that does a lot of in-ground vegetable production, I think they would be the best one to reach out to. If you're in other parts of the U.S., in Washington, D.C., the University of District of Columbia has a couple of demonstration aquaponic facilities. One of them is at Union Station East, I think it's called. Something like that, just Capitol East, the Capitol East Metro stop, that's it. So you can visit an aquaponics demonstration aquaponics facility there. You might need to let them know you're coming ahead of time. Are there any other questions? We're doing pretty good for time.
Okay. None other at this time.
Awesome. Please do share your questions. This is for your edification, so I want to make sure we're getting at what you're interested in. So the more kind of high-tech urban farming. These pictures are of an aquaponics urban farm. So I'm going to differentiate right now between hydroponics and aquaponics. Hydroponics is when you grow plants without soil, with only maybe a little plug of soil. You can see in the picture on the right the little those white squares are styrofoam with little holes cut out, and it's floating in a giant tub of water. And the little dark circles in the styrofoam, there's a little plug of growth media. It's not soil, it's actually coconut coir and compost mixed together. And that's all the growth media that the plants have. Their roots then extend into the water. So hydroponics is a system of growing plants mostly in water and supplying the nutrient needs of the plants in a liquid form. Aquaponics is an adaptation of a hydroponic system that integrates fish. And you can see the fish are in the blue tubs in the picture on the left. You raise the fish, usually tilapia, because tilapia are very hardy fish. They're difficult to kill. And you raise the fish, you feed the fish fish food that you've purchased. The fish then excrete their waste into the water, and the water is then cycled through a second set of tubs, which you can see on the very far left of your screen. The farmer is leaning on them, that then filters that water and lets the solids settle out, and some little plastic beads are in there where bacteria live, and the bacteria convert ammonia in the water into nitrate, which is usually more available to plants. And then that slightly filtered water goes to the big tub, which you can see on the right, where the plants are floating, and the plants take up the nutrients that are left from the fish waste. So that's aquaponics. It's hydroponics, but with fish. Aquaculture is when you're growing just the seafood, just fish, or just oysters. So this is an aquaponic facility here in Baltimore. I talked a little bit ago about how some of this technology is very new. This farm, this aquaponic farm, is in a high tunnel, so it's using natural light to grow the plants. And using hydroponics and natural light in high tunnels is actually a relatively time-tested technology. People in Florida, people in Israel, people in Holland have been using this technology for a very long time, and they've worked a lot of the kinks out of it, and they've kind of figured out how to do it in a commercially viable way. So if you're using natural light, it seems like that is pretty well tested and figured out. The aquaponics, integrating the fish, that's a little bit newer. And from what I've heard from the farmers, you don't actually make a lot of money on the fish. You only grow a few of them at a time. You don't need a lot of fish to produce enough waste to fertilize the plants. You're mostly using them as a source of manure, essentially. I have heard of and figuring out a type of fish that you can grow that can tolerate the conditions of living in a tub in a high tunnel. Usually those fish are not worth a lot of money when you sell them. So the moneymaker is really the plants that you're growing, some type of usually very high-value leafy green or herbs. Another type of high-tech urban farming is when you're growing with artificial light. And you may have seen some articles about people growing in shipping containers. This is an example of a shipping container farm here in Baltimore. It's called Urban Pastoral. It's run by a gentleman named J.J. Reedy, and I'm forgetting his business partner's name right now. So they're growing mostly herbs, lots and lots and lots of basil in the shipping container in Baltimore. And then they use the herbs in their restaurant, often for pizza toppings. So that you can see in the back of the picture on the left, there's those bright, very bright things. Those are, that's light from LEDs reflecting off of these sort of tubes full of expanded rock, I think is what it's called. It's this kind of squishy, almost sponge-like material that you insert the plant into, and it grows in a hydroponic way, mostly using water to deliver the nutrients and using LEDs to provide the light that the plant needs. This is a very cool way of growing vegetables. It gets people's attention. The people who come to the restaurant think it's really exciting, so it provides sort of an agritourism benefit that way. It is, though, a big investment to set one of these things up. I've heard $10,000 to $25,000 per shipping container to get one set up, which is a huge upfront investment. And then there's also the cost of energy to keep it running. You need the energy for the LED lights. LEDs are much more efficient than older types of light bulbs, but they are not more efficient than the sun. So if you have access to natural light, that's a cost that is unnecessary. So it can be difficult to compete with artificial light when your competitor uses natural light. You also have the cost that sometimes people don't think about of cooling, air conditioning, because if you think about it, you're in this shipping container in the hot sun in Maryland, where it gets very, very hot in the summer. You have to keep it very cool to keep the plants from melting. So air conditioning is a big energy cost. So this is a very cool, very exciting technology, and I think there is promise, but people are still figuring out how to make it commercially viable. So usually people are having to grow very high value crops if they're using this technology, something that they can sell at a high enough price to pay for the cost of the electricity and their initial investment, something like microgreens or micro-herbs, things that are going into high-end restaurants. Sorry, I meant the top line there to say rooftop farms. So rooftop farms are the other type of kind of unusual technology that you see off in urban agriculture. There are not a lot of rooftop farms in Baltimore because we have so much vacant land and vacant lots. I've heard of one. I haven't gotten to go visit them yet. But in Washington, D.C., there are several rooftop farms. There's several buildings that were constructed to LEED standards that had green roofs, and some of those green roofs have been then adapted to commercial farming for production for sale. And this is a very cool new business model, new technology. There are a lot of challenges involved in figuring out what types of crops you can grow in the growth media that is possible to put on top of a building, because if you think about it, when you put soil on top of a building, soil and water is very heavy. So you need to make sure that the roof that you're growing on has enough load-bearing capacity to hold up all this extra weight. A lot of green roof researchers and architects have developed very lightweight growth media, expanded rock, volcanic rock that's been kind of filled with steam and heated and expanded. So there are some growth media that are very lightweight and enable you to grow plants, but the green roofs that these LEED buildings have, the growth media that they have is designed generally for very tough plants, like succulents, plants that can handle wild fluctuations in temperature and in moisture. So the folks who are figuring out how to grow food plants in these conditions, they're having to figure a lot of things out about how to keep the right amount of moisture and the right temperature in this new and difficult environment. So people are figuring this out right now. There is a demonstration green roof at the University of District of Columbia, in addition to a couple of commercial urban farms that are growing on green roofs in DC. So this is a very cool technology. I think it has a lot of promise, but like I said, people are still figuring it out. So I wouldn't bet your life savings on it without a lot of research and planning. So I've kind of hinted at it as I've been talking. Urban farming has a wide variety of practices and methods, but it also seems to have a wide variety of business structures. There are for-profit urban farms like Mr. and Mrs. Blue. Often people go into urban farming as a second career. They may have retired from a job that provides them with a little bit of income, and they want to supplement that income, or they want to get kind of back into something they enjoy more. Maybe they grew up on a farm and now they live in a city, and they want to have a second career as an urban farmer. There are young folks just out of school who are kind of startup entrepreneurs. J.J. Reedy and Urban Pastoral is an example of that, who are trying to have an urban farm as a for-profit business. There are also what I call Robin Hood business models, where people get into urban farming because they have a lot of love for their community and they want to feed their neighbors, but they also want to have a business for themselves and make a living doing this. And I think the flower factory, the cut flower farm that I showed at the beginning, is an example of this, where Walker Marsh, the farmer who started it, he started a flower farm on a vacant lot in his neighborhood because he wanted to beautify his neighborhood and show his community that you can do something beautiful in Baltimore, when a lot of times people's impressions of the city are not as beautiful. But he is growing cut flowers because he knows those are not just beautiful, but they're also a high-value crop that he can sell to local florists and try to make a living for himself. There are other for-profit urban farms that sell some of what they produce at a high price to people who have the money, so they can subsidize selling part of what they produce at a low price to their neighbors. Then there are nonprofit community farms. Usually those have a mission beyond just employing people, although, like I mentioned, Strength to Love is mainly, their main goal is employing people, but they are a nonprofit because their main goal is employing people who the for-profit market have not successfully employed. The other nonprofit farms tend to have a mission of what they call food justice, or they might have a mission of education, and they're trying to use agriculture to advance that mission. There are also, I've seen, there are community gardens that are they started out as personal gardening and community gardening and have started to drift into the for-profit world or the for-sale world as a way of providing financial stability. For example, there are some community farms in Baltimore where the community garden members grow vegetables communally. They instead of having their own beds, they grow like all tomatoes in one bed and all cucumbers in another bed, and then they share the produce together, and they work together, and they share it when the things are harvested. But some of them have also started exploring a CSA model, a community-supported agriculture model, where you can get produce from the community garden by volunteering and working there, or by buying in to the garden, by buying a CSA share. And this is how vegetable farms have financed some of their farming. And these community gardens are using that to pay for some of the financial costs of running a garden, buying seeds at the beginning of the year, that kind of thing, to try to make it more financially long-term viable to have a community garden. So there are a lot of business structures, a lot of different business structures that people are trying with urban farming, which makes it a very exciting world for an educator like me to be in, because I get to spend a lot of time visiting farms. I've been trying to visit every urban farm in Baltimore, and if you're listening and I haven't visited you yet, if you're from Baltimore, please do reach out to me. I'd love to come visit your farm. I've been to almost 30 farms so far. There are a lot of people doing a lot of cool things in this field. So that brings me to what my role is as an extension agent and extension educator for urban farmers. Like I mentioned, I'm focused on commercial urban agriculture. We have the Master Gardener program, which is a wonderful program specifically for home gardeners and community gardens. So I let them do their thing, and there's about 200 of them in Baltimore City. I couldn't possibly do a fraction of what they do. So they focus on home gardeners and community gardens. My focus is on commercial urban agriculture, people who are trying to do something entrepreneurial, trying to create a living for themselves or create jobs using agriculture in the city. So it's my job to provide research-based training and technical assistance to those folks. I do everything from formal classes. Cultivate Baltimore is a series that I partner with the Farm Alliance of Baltimore and Future Harvest on, to one-off workshops and field days. Like we had a field day on GAPS certification for urban farmers last summer. GAPS is a food safety certification. And as informal as one-on-one technical assistance, I've worked with people on figuring out how to price their produce for sale at farmers markets, or on identifying pests that are afflicting their crops. So I work with people one-on-one as needed as well and as requested. So thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this presentation. I'm going to put a link to a teaching evaluation in the chat and request that you fill it out. It's very short. It's about 5 questions, and most of them are multiple choice. My contact information is there. I'll put that in the chat as well, and these are references that I've found useful while I've been learning more about urban agriculture. And I believe these slides will be available as a PDF for you on the website, the Women in Agriculture website, afterwards. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the webinar. And if you have more questions, please share them with me. All right, here is the link to the teaching evaluation and my contact information. It would be wonderful if you would fill that out and let me know how I'm doing. I am a public servant. You are the public, so you get to decide whether I'm doing my job. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Nia. Thank you. And please feel free to reach out to Nia. She does a great newsletter and getting information out about programs in the area and interests for urban ag. So feel free to shoot her an email and she can add you to her email distribution list.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions that you have?
How complicated is working with city government in setting up urban farms in Baltimore?
All right, so I'll admit, it is, city government is a huge lumbering bureaucracy, so it's not simple, but as the employee of a huge lumbering bureaucracy myself, I recognize that there are some folks in Baltimore City who are working very hard to try to make it easier. And I think the folks at the Baltimore Office of Sustainability are working very hard to do that. If you go to their website, actually, I'll pull that up right now and put the link in the chat. They have a lot of guides prepared on urban agriculture in Baltimore City. They've done a lot of work over the past few years on changing local policy to be more friendly to urban agriculture. And they are, there's only, I think, 3 of them who work there full-time, so they are a little bit busy, but you can reach out to them and they will do their best to help you, and I'm here to help as well. So if you have questions about how things work, you can also reach out to me, and if you can't get through to the folks at the city, I can try and find out more information. I can kind of be that go-between.
Cool. Any other questions? Feel free. There's a question and answer pod or the open chat. Right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.